Hello, and welcome to the Mime Radio Show. I'm Karen Hoyer.
And I'm James Donlin. How are you, Karen?
I'm good.
Good.
It's a beautiful
Karen's in
day.
the basement, the mine basement, and
Yep.
I'm looking out at the Santa Monica Mountains in a place called Camarillo, California, which many of you don't have any idea where that is.
But our guest is kind of close by, right?
Yeah, he's down the freeway. He's down the 101 freeway, somewhere in the center of Los Angeles, if not the center, in the suburbia, the sprawl of the valley and so forth.
Yes, well,
Today's guest is a very interesting guy. I'm really looking forward to talking to them. And should I read something about him?
go ahead.
Dean Evans, ladies and gentlemen. Dean Evans is a Los Angeles based professional performer, writer, and director. They were named one of the top 50 players by New City Magazine. They have performed with the Second City, I.O., The Goodman, Cirque du Soleil, and as a solo artist around the world. Dean is known for their physical performance and characters, including the entity who simply goes by Honey Buns. Dean has been on the faculty at Columbia College, the Celebration Barn, the Second City Training Center, Aloft Circus Arts, and the Actors Gymnasium. They have taught as a guest artist at the Art Institute of Chicago, the Big Apple Circus Clown Care Unit, University of Illinois Chicago, Oberlin College, the Ohio State University, Lake Forest College, and more. Dean was the artistic director of Chicago Physical Theater from 2009 to 2016. He currently teaches classes in clown, mime, bouffon, and ensemble creation in Los Angeles. So with that, let's welcome in Dean Evans.
Hello, it's me. I'm here.
Hi, Dean. Welcome
Hey,
to the Mime Radio Show. I
for
know you
having me.
from,
Long time listener.
yes, I know you from your time here in Chicago, and now you're on the West Coast. But recently we're in the East Coast at Celebration Barn.
That is correct. I'm
Yeah.
You were teaching a
bi-coastal.
workshop there, correct?
I was teaching mime at the Celebration Barn. It was amazing.
That's quite a feat because Celebration Barn and Mime have been connected over the years, started by Tony Montanaro, and so you were continuing the mime school, right?
Oops. Your
You've
voice has
disappeared.
disappeared, Dean. Don't do mime right now. You're doing silent comedy. Turn that volume back. It's still out. We can't hear you. We can't
Whoops.
hear you, Dean.
How about now?
Now
There
we
you
can
go.
hear you.
Now you can
I
hear
don't
me.
think we're going to edit that out because I kind of like that. I think Dean was, giving us a move around the far end, So
So we can't re-lip. So tell us what you were saying.
Oh,
yeah.
for sure. Oh, I was just saying the Celebration Bar, founded by a mime, Tony Montanaro. I definitely had some big shoes to fill in terms of bringing mime back, but had a great workshop this year. I can't undersell it. It was a fantastic workshop this year. Last year was amazing too. It was a smaller group, but this year was a bigger group, and I just felt like we hit that next level, whatever that is, and some great work. So a new generation of mimes, hopefully.
Yeah, I was going to say you're the in the vanguard of the 20. I'd say the 20. Are we in the 21st century? Yeah, in the 21st century mimes, because a lot of us, like James here, we're getting a little older. So it's great to see that there's new interest in the art of mime.
Oh, for sure. I think it's there. I definitely, yeah, like when I got introduced to mime, I was kind of on that cusp. I was sort of being taught by that previous generation, and it was definitely a time of shifting. The way things work economically, everything was kind of changing, but I caught I got some training in there with some masters before they moved on. So
Tell us a little bit how you did get first introduced to mime.
yeah, for sure. So around 2001, I started going to college for theater, and I had not seen any theater prior to that. I started studying theater on a dare. But when I was doing theater, I noticed they had a movement class, and I signed up for movement. I had no idea what it was, but it sounded so fun. And then instantly became a movement nerd. And then there was a teacher there named Janine Thompson, and she taught a mime class. And I signed up for her mime class. I kind of thought it would be kind of a funny joke. Um, Jokes on me because I became a mime. But I went, I remember going to her class for the first day, and she was like, "Who are you? How'd you get into this class? This is just, it's kind of a special topics for grad student class." But there was some kind of computer glitch or whatever. Let me enroll in the class. She was like, "Do you really want to stay?" And I was like, "Heck yeah." But it was kind of a good start because it was a longer class. It was like a 16-week long class. You meet twice a week. And so I got and Janine Thompson's just one of my favorite mimes of all time. And so I got in there. And then she, after the class, was like, "Hey, you should keep going." And she recommended me to the School for Mime Theater,
Mm-hmm.
which was a school for mime that had been going on for a long time on the campus of Kenyon College during the summers. And I started going there. And the first year I did that, it was back in the day when the immersions were a little longer. So I did a 3-week immersion at the School for Mime Theater, and then I did a 1-week immersion with Nick Johnson, and then I did a 1-week immersion with Stefan Nidziakowski, a Polish mime. And then the following year, Janine Thompson brought Marcel Marceau into the college. He taught a master class with his assistant Jean G, and then did a couple shows. And so I kind of lucked out. It was kind of a perfect mime storm.
Uh-huh.
Early on, I got a lot of good training kind of compacted in there. And then I continued to attend the School for Mime Theater for many years. So that was my initial training, really was mime early on in my theater career. My focus was on physical theater, and my technique really was mime. And also writing is really like what I do mostly is devising, writing, creating, and mime is the perfect art form for that because typically you write all your own material and you direct it and you edit it and you costume design and so
What attracted you, Dean? What attracted you to the mime art in the beginning? And I know everyone has their style. The teachers you mentioned all have a particular approach, but for you, what was the hook that made you want to pursue this further?
yeah, that's a good question. Like I'd mentioned, the first class I took was a chunk. And probably for the first 10 weeks, I had no idea what we were doing. We were doing corporeal mime, and I love moving. I really do I'm a movement nerd. I get a lot of joy out of being physical. I'm a kinetic learner, but I didn't quite conceptualize what the art of mime was until many weeks into the class. We watched a video, and I'd never really seen a mime performance. We watched a video of Marcel Marceau. It was his old, I think, special on ABC, like from the 50s. And he did the piece where he played the pickpocket, the
Yeah.
young, kind of cocky French pickpocket. And the second he walked on stage, even though it was on television, that character walk, I just something clicked where I was like, that's it. Like portraying characters and telling stories was really what got me. And I love playing characters. I still play characters. I do a lot of different sort of physical characters in comedy and theater. But whatever that was, that not just playing a character, but the way that mime allows you to abstract the character and present it in a more stylistic way just really set me on fire. And then I made a mime piece where I kind of it was my first mime piece, which I still perform when I have to perform mime. It's a good piece, but I really latched on to that kind of visual storytelling. And when I was a kid, I really liked animation, and
Yep.
I really liked that type of visual storytelling. So really, it was the character and the storytelling that's kind of what set me initially.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you said like the first class that you were taking was corporeal mime, which is kind of a difficult way to start with mime. It's the absolute great for the technique of it, but as
Mhm.
far as the creating and the storytelling part, it can be very challenging because you're mostly talking about technique when you start there.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It move like this, move like this, move like this, move like this. And then, it's definitely like a Mr. Miyagi wax on, wax off moment, like at the end of the semester. Because I did love the movement, but you're right, it's high form, abstract movement. Generally like no facial expression. And really my style is definitely more character comedy driven. But I'm glad that I learned that grammar. It definitely changed my body into being more of an instrument, more of a vessel. So it was a good introduction. But Janine is a dancer as well, and really has a interesting take on mime. She's a fantastic mime. She has corporeal training. A lot of Marceau technique is in there. But she was also into viewpoints and Suzuki, and is got that kind of dancer metamorphose kind of style.
Mhm.
And she did a large production my first year in college. Actually, the first show I was ever in, she did this large scale Mimo drama with 35 people in it. So my introduction to mime was kind of through the kind of beautiful lyrical mime. And I really like that. I was thinking about that today. I really enjoyed that was my entryway into it, because I wasn't especially equipped, for that initially, but it helped me to really like get into my body. And then from there, I started getting obsessed with little character stories, and ultimately mime is what also led me to clown. During the School for Mime Theater, there was one clown class, and I remember learning that art form, which is a different thing, but obviously deeply complementary to any other discipline. But once I got hooked on that and had that mime as my foundation and attempted to kind of marry those worlds, I was hooked. And I
What's
actually,
I was gonna say what like you were introduced to mine, let's say 2001, 2002, like definitely 2000s. What would you say was the reason that you weren't exposed or weren't really aware of mime or clown before the year 2000?
oh,
I'm curious, as a young person, a teenager or young adult, like what does our culture lack that maybe you weren't exposed to that, or maybe you saw it and you didn't recognize it? What do you think about that?
good question. I was a kid from Ohio, and lived, in kind of a suburb that had, one foot in suburban life and one foot in sort of a more rural existence. And, like, okay, my mom took me to the Nutcracker a few times, but it wasn't at the time. Central Ohio wasn't a big theater hub. There wasn't really live comedy that I knew of, but I would see concerts. I was like kind of a punk kid, and I was like punk and goth and industrial. I was into music. I really thought I was going to be a musician up until I was even in my early 20s. So we would go to concerts. So my exposure to live performance was really concerts, but I don't know. It just what it didn't really. It wasn't there. I didn't see it. I vaguely remember some mimes coming through my school, and I have a theory that those mimes were actually two of my mime teachers, because they were talking about doing school tours in that area. And there were some mimes from Columbus. Robert Post was from there, and Greg Goldston was living there, and Janine was living there. So it's not like they weren't around, but I just was being a kid that was not from that realm. Didn't have exposure to theater or live performance except for like, heavy metal concerts. Yeah,
You
I
think
just
So,
that's a normal way a kid in the USA grows up? I mean,
Oh, I
in a
definitely think so. Where I'm from, for sure.
yeah.
I just went to a really fun pool party in LA yesterday, and I hang out with performers, always have, but I do feel very different from them when we talk about our upbringing. They're like kids that by the time they get to college, and also I've taught in college and taught performing arts, they've already done professional contracts. They've been seeing avant-garde theater since they were a kid, and maybe their parents are involved with the arts, and it is a completely different upbringing than what I had. What I had was, dirt bikes, tractor pools, monster truck shows, NASCAR, maybe some sports in there. When I was a nerdy art kid, but I just didn't really have, I just hung out with other weird kids. It was just a different upbringing.
so So I don't know if you know this, but James was my mime teacher when I was in college. And I know that when I teach, every once in a while I do something and then later on I found, oh, that was something I got from my time with James. So when you are teaching and you've listed a lot of really interesting people as your teachers,
Mm-hmm.
do you combine what you've learned from them? Do you adapt it? What do you ever notice that you're borrowing from your teachers?
Of course, all the time. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I said, initially my sort of intro to mime was through the kind of lyrical, beautiful mime, the kind of holy grail of mime, as I was taught, was the kind of poetic metamorphose. Like the goal was to be beautiful and lyrical and abstract and find these transitions. And I definitely think of like Laurie Heald was one of my mime teachers, fantastic, beautiful lyrical mime. Rick Waymer was probably one of my larger influences. And yeah, they were funny. Like they're some of the funniest people I've ever met. But they would always be gravitating and kind of steering us towards this, the artfulness and the beauty and the poetry of mime. um, and so I definitely think of those basic fundamentals, the full body movement, the line and design, when I'm doing stuff. But ultimately, I'm a huge goofball, and I'm a reverent and I'm a clown and a bouffon. So eventually, like that stuff starts creeping in there too.
Yeah.
But I definitely, of course, I mean, I'm just an amalgamation of my teachers, for sure.
Would you say I mean, training as an actor? I mean, you started as an actor, I would say, right, in theater. I mean,
Yeah, my first like performance class ever was acting in theater in college. Yeah.
so you would say the theater and acting is the source, and then the mime. How does the mime work flesh that out? I mean, if you have the source is character and inner life and storytelling, which is theater,
Hmm.
how what why go toward mime instead of going toward the more conventional, mainstream acting path?
That's a good question. I think early on in college, it was a couple things. When I went to mime school, I felt for the first time that I was surrounded by people who were the most like me than other groups of people. So there was definitely some kind of cosmic homecoming happening there. And also, I was good at it. Whatever it is, there is some kind of genetic thing with the type of coordination required for that art form that I did have a little natural kick for.
Yeah.
So I was also getting positive attention for something that I had never gotten. So I was like, oh, I'm good at something and everybody thinks I'm good at it. But really, ultimately, it was the writing of my own material. At the School for Mime Theater, you have to write a new piece every day, and it's grueling. You're banging your head against the wall, getting pieces to come out. And then when I would go back to college and then post college, go back to my life, I had all these new pieces. And so that gave me, things to do on stage because it wasn't like I was getting cast in, in theater right off the bat. Eventually I would, but so I was coming out of mime school with original work that I liked doing, and it was solo, and I could just sort of get up there and do it. And then during those early theater years, I would always look for shows that would have a slot, that I get 5-10 minutes, and I'd go on and do a piece. And mime seemed to be the best way for me to show off what I was good at and also tell the particular brand of stories that I like telling. I'm very much a visual storyteller, stellar teller. I like filmmaking. I like mime. They're very similar in terms of the composition.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
And
mean,
and
yeah,
plus you're a writer. I mean, I think that's
yeah,
is maybe the hard part of mime is creating your own work, but I think that's the thing that often is the reason why we're passionate about the art form is because we get a chance to create our own work.
yeah. I definitely am a writer. If left to my own, I just will make things. And I like that word. I use that word writing, even though most of the times I'm not sitting down typing, like looking at a blank screen writing a mind piece, but I am a writer, a creator, a deviser, and I think my strength is the creativity, and that mime seemed to be a way to sort of be an auteur of your own work. And so
Yeah, yeah.
it seemed to work the best initially. And also I really do have a passion for the art of mime. When I started watching these mime performances, I really had a front row seat to some of them. I mean, I saw Stefan Nijikovsky do a solo show. I saw Marcel Marceau perform twice. I saw Janine, Rick, Lori, Dan Griffiths, and Stephen Chips did Kaput, which was a clown mime hybrid that I later became a company member of. I mean, I really got early on, and I just fell in love with those shows and those artists. I really, whatever it is about the visual poetry of mime, I just absolutely am passionate about. So, even though most of the time I'm doing other things, whether it be clown, comedy, bouffant, whatever, it's very deeply integrated into what I do with mime, and specifically the writing structures that we worked on, and the way to stage things and do transitions and hook people into the psychology of a story. It's for sure I'm very deeply rooted in my mime for that.
Well, this seems really appropriate for younger generations to hear because it's becoming, as you probably realize, well, at least I realize, it's more challenging for a young artist, a young performing artist to be seen now.
Mm-hmm.
You have to take matters into your own hand very often now. You have to it's always been that way to a certain extent, but even now the world is so complex of performing arts and so financially driven that young artists don't very often have opportunities to grow. But it seems to me what you're saying is the art of mime gives you the opportunity to create on your own terms, write your material, perform your own material, direct your own material, seek out the people you want to work with. And it seems like it's a very appropriate art form for the 21st century, if you want to talk like that,
I think you're exactly right. I think you phrased it well. And I definitely think you're right. When I first was started talking to the Celebration Barn about teaching there, that was an interesting conversation I had with Mandy, who was the executive director before David, who is now, which was essentially, and I hate to drag social media into it. It's opening up a can of worms, but it's kind of like TikTok in a way where you can make a sort of completely encapsulated piece of your own work that can be beautiful and impressive and funny or whatever, and it can work on video. Because the first class I taught for the barn was actually online. I started teaching mime online during the pandemic. I was in the middle of teaching a mime class in LA, an in-person one, and the pandemic happened. So I was like, well, we'll just keep doing it online. And all
wasn't
these people came.
Dean, wasn't it like mime and wine or something?
It was mime online with wine. So I would pair each class with a French wine initially.
That's great. That's fantastic.
I did that for a long time. I mean, initially there would be 40, 50 people in those classes initially. That's how I was getting by in the pandemic originally. It still goes on, although I do it once a month now. There's a whole community around it. It's quite beautiful. I did learn a lot about wine. I did learn which types I like. And there were definitely some mime onlines where by the end of it, I was pretty tanked. And that was fun too. I was like, I would always joke, well, you're thirsty and you don't have anything to drink but wine. It helps the muscles. But
it's a great idea. It goes back to the Rat Pack, the old entertainers, the Vegas entertainers.
Oh, for sure.
They used to drink all the time. That was part of the deal, was to drink while you were doing your thing.
James and I always want to have a toast of mime wine.
Yeah.
Of course. Oh,
that's a great idea. I did that once. I remember we drank wine during the mime class, and it worked well. So you were on to something there.
Yeah, it really does. It's like, I perform in a lot of comedy venues, and in Chicago, I did a ton of improv, and that's like the old comedy warm up. Your warm up is you go to the bar, you get a big beer, you drink it, and then you go on stage. And that's the warm up.
Yes. And so you were talking about your initial conversation with Celebration Barn, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you did online classes, and then you wanted to do them in person?
Yeah, so was doing Mime online, and then we talked about doing kind of an intro to Mime. They were sort of looking into online classes to offer when everything was shut down, and so I did a Mime class, and our kind of angle with it was that Mime is actually a wonderful tool for the modern content creator, which I believe is true. And so I taught the class, and it worked very well because you know there's just a lot with mime. You know, there is technique, but you're also working with composition and character, and those things are really important. You know, when you're making stuff, whether it's short films or short pieces for the stage, of how to compose,
Yeah.
how to create a piece.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of the warm up, the drinking the beer, like how do you prepare for your performance? And I'm not talking about like the first hour. I'm talking about like the last, let's say the minute before you go on stage. What is it that your being is doing at that point? And maybe you want to share with us what you do for the 30 minutes or 45 minutes before that. But particularly how do you get yourself in that realm to like enter that platform, you know?
Yeah, when it comes to that initial moment and coming out, no matter what kind of show it is, um, I go back to clowning, and I am almost always right before I go on stage. I try to let everything fall away, and I'm just thinking about um, connecting and establishing rapport. That's just where I go. And also, I have tremendous stage fright. It doesn't manifest itself in like a nail biting fear. I just have a lot of anxiety about performing. So one of the reasons why I think I initially got so much into clown is it's essentially, dealing with that and coping with it, and with honesty and authenticity. And so right before I go on stage, I just go back to the clown thing of make an entrance, connect, and breathe. So I'm just thinking about looking at the audience and breathing. And I try to keep it that simple. And then from there, I hope everything else falls into place.
Do you have
Usually.
tools? Like, what are your tools? I mean, any processes that you use in that 30 seconds before you go on, or is it
Yeah,
more ethereal and more Cosmo, as you say?
it's fairly it's somewhat cosmic. I do try to make sure that uh the word that I use is alive. Like I used to do this warm up with Kaput where I would just make sure my eyes are wide open, I'm energetic and alive, and then
Would you actually do this?
yeah, I do. I just try
That's
to
great.
wake up and like kind of give myself some kind of a wake up, get up, little kick in the butt, and yeah, and then I think about making an entrance, even if it's not a clown show. I do think about that the classic clown thing, have your eyes come around the corner, and even if I can't see them,
Yeah.
I just try to connect and breathe, and a lot of deep breaths to make sure that my nervous system isn't overwhelmed, and that's about it. And I do, depending on the show, like when I do Honey Buns is a Buffon show, but Honey Buns is a mime, and I use mime and the art of mime to kind of get into the crowd and people, but I do try to connect with some kind of reason to go on stage that is larger than myself. And so with honey buns, and something that usually works to get me charged up right before I go out, is connecting with what kind of trick I'm going to do to the audience. Trick in a good way, not like a mean trick, but I am a trickster and I love pranks, and it gets me very excited to perform. I'm also, I'm deeply introverted and very shy. So generally speaking, I'm like, nobody look at me. So I have a lot of anxiety about it. But if I can connect, and I even do that, I rub my hands together and I do kind of, let me at him, let me get him. I can't wait to just really get him. And that'll get me right before I go out. If I'm right backstage going, no, let me out there, curtain opens, that puts me in a good spot. And if it's more of a typical mime show where I'm doing vignettes, then something I sort of discovered through clowning, studying with Avner in terms of my relationship with performing, is I say to myself quite simply, I have a chance to tell my story, which is pretty straightforward. But when I was working with him, I had kind of a big epiphany around that helped me to kind of deal with my stage fright. And I really do enjoy storytelling. And
When
that
you perform, how much, well, two parts. How much of your solo work is set and how much is it improvised? And in that same context, what's your relationship with the audience? Like I know your performance as Honey Bun is um, more clownesque, where you're really connected to the audience and it probably has a little more improvisation of it. But do you have like a range of different shows where improv to set, connect to the audience to fourth wall?
I do. In that conversation there, that question is very relevant for each project because it does change. Honey Buns, I have like opening numbers, and I do have mime pieces that I do in there that are pretty much, audience there are not. They're pretty similar. Obviously, I feed off the audience, but then the other 85% of the show, I'm talking and I'm doing a fair amount of improvisation, although I have points that I want to hit. I'm kind of going through. When it comes to performing a mime piece, I am a clown. I do like to connect with them. I certainly take moments to them. I do takes to them. I see them, but it's not like when I'm clowning and I really am every single moment connected with them in the room. I'm kind of telling my story and taking these moments to them, but it's more set. And then when I'm doing like a character set, I am, especially if it's really verbal. I'm pretty on script. I do love improvising. It's one of my favorite things, whether it's improv or music or whatever it is. So any opportunity I can to ride the train off the tracks, I will. But if I'm doing material that I've written, I'm pretty on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yeah.
I might give myself some gaps in there to play with and see where it goes. But I'm usually either on a thing and doing it, or doing a improvisation with the crowd. I do a lot of audience interactivity, stuff like that.
There's also you
What
have a long history with the neo-futurists too, and that was one of their sort of tenets was if something happens, you can't deny it. You have to deal with it. If somebody drop a prop, it becomes a part of the whole process.
For sure,
Yeah.
yeah. The neo-futurists were right when I moved to Chicago because I started working with Kaput, and then maybe a year later was with the neo-futurists performing with that aesthetic, which is the non-illusionary theater. So they were a huge influence in terms of writing pieces that take place in the audience with the audience, and that was what I was primarily doing for a big chunk of those years was writing material where I was me and I was interacting with them, and yeah, I mean they were essentially like my grad school, almost the neo-futurists. And now I have a new troupe now called the Nonsemble in LA. We're not neo-futurists, we're more clown based, but it's similar. We do short form like that, and we're clowns. Clown and neo-futurism, they're not quite the same, but they intersect a lot around that part of having that direct and immediate relationship with the audience. So this particular troupe is more clown based, but it is similar. It's all audience interactive stuff. Yeah.
What's it called
who
again?
is that?
What's it
Who is
called
that
again?
audience to you?
Who is the
Yeah,
audience?
Yeah.
who like I'm not talking about, how old they are or if they're female or male or in between or whatever, from another planet. What
Mhm.
what does that body of energy represent to you? Now, you're talking a lot now about the interaction and the
Hmm.
them and Buffon and clown and what how do you perceive that force in front of you that you're offering yourself to?
Yeah, good question. I think deep down, what if I'm feeling connected and in that flow space and I'm with an audience in the way that I want to be, I think what I'm seeking is safety and solidarity, even though my work does tend to have a fair amount of like irreverence and kind of perceived danger. I never feel more safe than when I'm with a group of people and we're all sort of complicit with wherever something is going. And for me, I feel like it's the only safe space where I get to be so extreme and emotional and vulnerable. Because in the real world, I don't really feel that way. I do my particular brand of anxiety and depression tends to be, even though for all intents and purposes, I'm safe. I haven't been stabbed in public recently. I'm pretty safe, but I do always kind of feel a little unsafe for whatever reason. We could go, we have a whole nother podcast on that. But when I am with that crowd, I behave in ways that I don't obviously in public. And there is a kind of safety. I feel it's almost like the safety of role playing. Oh, I'm going to role play me doing all these extreme things and these things that are inside of me, and it'll be safe because the context in which they're viewing it gives us this kind of space where it's okay and celebrated to behave and surprise and shock people. So I honestly think I'm looking for safety and understanding.
Yeah, so
That's really
I'm taking
beautiful.
it that the audience is a nurturing place, a place of growth and acceptance. It's like the ultimate dream of being human. We as a social species find a place to commune. So that's what I'm getting from your
Yeah,
words.
I think that's a really good way to phrase it. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Even
Yeah.
though I like audiences that push back a little, I don't necessarily enjoy being heckled, but I like a little bit of a rowdy audience. I like it when they're not completely complicit. But that within that sort of friendly struggle, I do find a kind of peace. Yeah.
And I think that's what the audience is seeking too. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the reason why we've had live theater for centuries, is because people need to have that space. I mean, I really love what you say about creating a safe space where you feel like you're supported and you can make something happen, because it's this collaboration between you and the audience. It's like, I don't, James, is it hot in here?
Oh,
Are you?
I feel really hot.
yeah.
Like I'm sweating or something. Excuse me.
Put it out. Put it out.
Oh my gosh. All right. Okay. All right. Sorry. Dean, are you feeling the heat? It's
Oh yeah, it's super
yeah,
hot.
yeah.
What's going on?
It's
Dean,
totally time for
it's
rapid fire.
it's time for
Oh,
rapid
okay.
fire.
Okay.
I don't know if
You
you've
ready?
seen my other interviews with people, but there comes a time when your brain on fire must be, either ignited or calmed or whatever. So we're going to play a word association game with you if you agree. And you can do this physically or verbally or both together. So it's very simple. I'm just going to throw out some terms to you, some words, and you just react as quickly as you can
Okay.
uh, to that. Is that something that you feel you might want to be able to do with us right
Of
now?
course. And am I just giving you like just a short, quick response?
Short, quick response.
Okay. Let's
So I'm
do
going
it.
to put on my Mime
If
colored
you want to, if you want to stand up and adjust your camera, or if you want to
Oh,
do
okay.
sitting down, whatever you want.
Let me get off my chair. Okay, here we go. Yeah, sure.
Wow.
Let's see. What do we got?
All right, you ready?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Hands. Eyes.
For those of you who can't see, it's just some brilliant
Sweat.
oh uh sweat, being in the basement, walking against the wind.
Elder.
Elder, wisdom.
Thank you. Fourth wall.
Smash it.
Child.
Innocence, potential.
Good. Don't be afraid to physicalize these if you'd like.
Okay.
Props.
Props.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go. Got some props. Got some hats. Here's a hat. I got my Christmas boy. I've got a whole shelf of props over here you can't really see.
And by
Love
the way, just as a segue, the one you just held up on your left, well, that one, the one with the clown hat, is there a story behind that?
um, this was for something. I made this. It's just a rolled up piece of red paper. It's sort of like I'm obsessed with pointy hats, like dunce style hats. It's whenever I'm like researching hats for a costume, I'm always drawn to pointy hats. So I
Oh,
have some
Does
point.
Honey Bun
Honey
have
Buns
one?
has a really tall pointy hat with a spiral on it,
And your
and
character in Burning Bluebeard also has.
yes, the Pierrot has a pointy hat. I love that style of hats, and this is kind of a mini one that I made. I forget what I made this for specifically. It was for some show, or it's like a little mini pointy one.
Okay, back to
and the
work.
doll, and the doll.
Oh, more
This one I got,
distractions.
it's a real antique doll that I got at a white elephant this Christmas, and he's called Christmas Boy. And it was new in box, but it's from like way back when, but I got it. And some say he's haunted, but this is Christmas Boy.
Will Christmas Boy be in one of your pieces in the future, or already
Oh
is?
You
dear.
know, perhaps early on in my mime career, I used to do a bit with a doll that would fall to pieces, and I had them rigged with a lot of magnets and things. And I definitely
Mm.
have some kind of doll preoccupation I haven't dealt with in a while, so I might have to integrate him into some show.
Cool. All right, we're going to
Haunted
continue.
doll watch there.
We're going to continue, and for the next few words, I want nothing but physicality. All right,
Okay.
words. All right. Okay.
Mhm.
Master James.
Okay. Here we go. Mask.
That was me putting on my mask.
Age.
Age.
Mm.
Ah.
Failure. Failure.
Ugh. Failure.
No words. No words. It's
Oh.
not on your vocabulary. Great. Teacher. Laser leaf. Oh, now we're getting somewhere.
Nice.
Velvet Sun. Sun.
Velvet Sun.
No words.
Ah.
Angry mythology.
Made a sound effect for that one, but
Yeah.
Corrupted innocence. And future.
that one was abstract.
Yeah.
Oh, I love
Nice.
abstract are the best. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That was
Welcome.
Rapid Fire by Dean Evans from Los Angeles, California.
Dean, during the pandemic, did you perform online?
I did. Well, I actually threw two mime festivals. We did the Mime Online Festival, and I performed, and some of the students performed.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Just recently, I was on my Zoom account, and I forgot that I had recorded one of them. So I need to get it and edit it down and do a promo. But yeah, I was doing Mime Online and some streaming stuff for sure. Something to sort of fill the time. But as soon as people started doing live shows, I hopped right back on that.
Yeah. It's just kind of interesting because it's like this sort of playful way that you can use the Zoom camera to using Mime and the Zoom camera was kind of an interesting challenge. But I agree with you. Go back to live as soon as possible.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I taught a class called Clown on Camera that was really fun. It was essentially creating work that was centered around performing for the camera, and I have to say I absolutely loved it. We would watch like Jacques Tati and these sort of visual filmmakers and kind of break it down. I have to, the pandemic actually really reignited my passion for mime because it seemed to teach. It seemed to go over the internet a little better than clown and the other things that I do. So I ended up being really reinvigorated with mime, and also because it's taught with technique, it is something that you can practice by yourself, which can be a little more challenging for other things that I do. So yeah, the pandemic sort of weirdly got me, I know more about mime than I ever have. I even started collecting more mime books and some copies of the mime journal and getting into more history and stuff, which was cool. But thank God that we're doing live shows again, because it's at its best, it's only 1% of a live show. But it did reinvigorate me in a way. And it definitely opened up the Mime Online. Most of my students at the barn are from Mime Online. It gave people that don't have access, like me in Ohio when I was young and didn't have access to things, all of a sudden they have access to things. So it served as an on ramp onto mime.
Tell
Do you
us a
have
little.
any?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, I was going. Do you have any interesting touring stories to tell us? Any
That's the
Oh my
same question
gosh.
I was going to ask, James.
unusual events that may be following you at some point?
Uh, yeah, I have a lot. I mean, my first gig was this brutal school tour with Kaput. Two people in a van, wake up at 6:30 in the morning, put on full white face, and keep it on until about 3:30 in the afternoon, do anywhere from 2 to 4 shows week after week. And lots of weird stuff happened then, because it was also pre-cell phone, asking for directions, wearing clown makeup day after day. um, and then I worked on a cruise ship, and there was a lot of fun traveling that happened on that for a while. My most sort of cosmic mime story, I was doing my first solo show. I'd moved to Chicago. I had done the Kaput tour. I was completely traumatized from that. I kind of mean that in a good way. It wasn't horrible. I learned a lot from the gig. It was just grueling. But I was doing my first full length solo show, which at the time was just like 6 mime pieces in a row in this theater called Prop Theater in Chicago. And I really had no experience doing this. One of the teachers at the mime school basically produced my show. It was like, let's just do it. I rented this theater. Let's do your solo show. And it was absolutely nerve-wracking and scary. And I remember being out back at this was not like a big fancy theater. This is like a storefront theater in Chicago with folding chairs on a cement floor, no backstage. But I was back behind the building on like this loading dock, and it was nighttime, and I was kind of nervous, but also feeling, the vibes of the cosmic experience of being a mime. And this beautiful, pristine white rabbit just like hopped right in front of me. And then, out of nowhere, this like perfect lightning strike in the distance just went, and then the rabbit hopped off. And I was like, that's weird. Something happened that was, I don't know what it means, but I guess in that moment, because I was so unsure and was leaning deeply into uncertainty, not just with the show, but with my life in general, having just moved out of, my childhood home. And then, I guess was kind of unknowingly asking for a sign. And then that weird thing happened with this rabbit and this lightning strike. And it's hard to explain because it was so storybook. It was just so unusual to see this perfect little white rabbit. There's rabbits all over Chicago. I'd never seen a perfectly white one in the summer. It was just a moment where I was like, okay, well, the universe, I don't know if it's saying yes or no or don't go or go, but it's there. And there's some kind of thing that's beyond me that I'm in relation to in regards to this experience of sharing myself with people. So I just thought, okay, well, I'll just keep going then. But I mean, during I've done a lot of different like weird gigs because I've done theater, I've done solo performing, and so there's all kinds of strange things that happen, as you know, from touring. Everything from doing shows in the gymaterium in the middle of Appalachia on a school that can barely keep the heat on too. I remember doing honey buns at the Skirball in New York with 900 people, doing that show, and then realizing after the first show that I didn't realize there was a balcony and nobody on the balcony could see me because I was like, I was like, oh, I didn't even know. Lots of all kind of interesting situations, fancy rich people's parties, to regional theater, underground neo-futurist devised pieces, to you know
So you're a classic fool, I would say.
yeah, yeah,
You're a jester. You're that guy that Shakespeare writes about, and whatever.
I took a medieval jester class from David Bridell this year. I loved it. I was like, ooh, yeah. I think ultimately in my soul, I am a bit of a satirist. I do like to be kind of irreverent and critical of the prevalent culture in a fun way. So I do think I do have a kind of a jester, trickster, bouffon
Yeah.
quality.
How do you introduce yourself, like in the when people say, well, what do you do,
Oh
what's your
boy, totally depends on who I'm talking to and what I think they're what I want to portray myself to them. I mean, as you know, if you tell someone you're a mime, no matter what you do after that, you will always be a mime to them, even if they never see you mime. I certainly don't mean that in a bad way. It's just a thing. Mime is a really strong noun. I am a mime. And if you say I am a mime, people don't tend to think like, oh, it's an artist who works within the realm of, they tend to go, oh, this person is a mime. So sometimes, I'll say clown or mime. I say theater artist a lot, or sometimes I'll say director or performer. Um,
Is
but
that a problem? Is that a problem? Is that a lot of us have struggled for our whole lives how to label ourselves in this world, this capitalist, label driven society, but what do you think about that? I mean,
well, I felt like in Chicago, things were a little more delineated, and how I introduced myself was, and again, this is just my experience in my head. It might all be fake. How I introduced myself and people were presented, I was presented to people was a little more important, because I was in these different communities, and I still am. I'm an in-between person. I did improv and comedy, but I also did theater, and I was also a clown and a physical theater person, and they do intersect, but in Chicago they're a little more separate to me, and I was kind of bouncing around, so it was a little more different. In LA, it's more of a complete shit show. It's just nobody cares what you are. You could say, I'm a professional hot dog eating contest winner. It doesn't matter. I feel like people are just like, do whatever you want. Everybody's definitely yearning to be seen, and feels that in common. And there's just millions of people that are just like, I do anything, whatever. So, and also right now there's hundreds of clowns in LA. There's this some kind of clown movement happening. So it's really cool to say you're a clown. And then everybody's obsessed with mime, although a lot of people don't really know what it is. So many comedy shows I go to these days, there's someone dressed like a kind of a white-faced street mime, which I personally don't really mind, but I am always curious. I'm like, oh, are you a mime? Because,
where
I'm a
does craft where does craft fit in all this? We're talking about, like, in LA, for example, this stoop in LA where the eccentricity of where you're coming from is all valid, but
Mhm.
what holds that together in terms of quality? I mean, it seems like the craft would have to do that, but so where does the recognition of craft and the understanding that you have to train at craft to be good at craft and to develop it and
yeah,
have
yeah, like,
it,
so, like you say, somebody shows up and they're dressed like a mime, but do they actually know the craft of mime?
No, but I'll say this: I get asked to teach mime more than anything. Um, And there are technique classes that come through, and everybody's really excited about them. I don't run into any resistance in terms of young students and artists that are incubating in terms of technique. They're all really hungry for it. But all the clown classes fill up, and the mime classes, I might have like 8 to 10 students, whereas my clown classes are just filled up weeks before. And so there is this thing where everybody, and I'm generalizing, they want to study technique. They get so much out of it. They recognize it. And the little bit they learn, they're like, oh my God, this is a game changer. But it's, it's one of those things. It's like, but also I could take this clown class and we could goof off the whole time, because obviously clown is really important too, and it's a huge part of my training. And I definitely took like a good 10-year chunk to just focus on being the stage present. Like, who cares about material? I want to be present and improvise everything. But there's a pendulum swing, and the pendulum swung so far towards the play-based pedagogy in LA that it kind of didn't swing back, but actually swung all the way up and around. And it's like, now there is a hunger and an acknowledgement of like, oh, we do need some kind of craft in the same way that water needs a glass or a bowl to be in. Otherwise, it just sinks right into the dirt.
That's a great analogy. Yeah, it's like otherwise it borders on therapy, which is dangerous. If it's just
it does, and sometimes it crosses that border, and you have to kind of be like, hey, don't quit your therapy to take clown. But that is a thing, and it tends to I feel that the pendulum is swinging towards the technique now. We've got someone's bringing in, I forget his name, an Italian guy. He's teaching a 4-day immersion on the 20 movements, and people are starting to seek that out more. And like I said, the mime school, we had 12 students this year, whereas the previous year we had 6. And some clowns from LA were in that workshop, and they were just, it's like, even if you're not a mime, especially if you're a clown who's only taking clown classes, learning mime is like putting a turbocharger on your car. It's like, even if you're not a mime, you just get access to a whole new world of play. And I think people are coming around to that. And people are asking me on an almost daily basis, when you teaching mime, when you teaching mime. Yeah, and I've had pretty good luck with teaching it. I do teach corporeal mime, and I do teach it, I don't want to say traditionally, but I start from scratch with mime, and I make them learn the vocabulary, but I do try to bring a sort of clown sensibility to how I teach it. I like to be disciplined about it, but I like to be really goofy. And I love it, but I also kind of make fun of it when I do it, which helps the new generation kind of get into it. It's like taking a ballet class. Like ballet, it is important to learn everything about ballet that makes it so hard. But if you're a 2023 clown student and you find yourself in a ballet class with a strict Russian teacher, you might not show up after the first day. And it's kind of like that with clown too. They kind of need someone to translate it a little bit. And you kind of have to trick people into, it's the wax on, wax off thing.
What would be could you show us maybe one of your first physical mime exercises? I mean, is there a one
How
that
do you start?
like a signature? Describe it or demonstrate what would be one of one of several probably of the first thing that you would introduce the modern young kid to from
To
your
mime?
yeah.
Yeah. Let me think. If I'm teaching a class and there's more than one class, and I'm really thinking about starting them off on some kind of foundation, I start with while they're still interested. During that first, so to say, it's a 3-hour class, and I've got about an hour and a half before their eyes glaze over and they need to do something kind of stupid and fun. I'll front load the class with, the kind of tedious to crew corporeal mime inclination scales while they're, yes, let's dive into that. So, we're doing standing in neutral, head, neck, chest, waist, all the different ways to incline the pelvis, Eiffel Tower, suppression of a support, and making them have that mime experience, because they also do kind of want that. They want to be in front of a mirror wearing all blacks. They kind of want to play with the stereotype of a mime and being like a classically trained mime student. And then you'll get about an hour and a half of that. And then, obviously, as you know, it's a very dense art form because it is moving poetry. And it's hard to get people to conceptualize even what the art of mime is, especially in the first hour of a class. So I just give them that and let it be mysterious. And then after that, we'll go into more contemporary mime and we'll do some short pieces like, a simple, I'm here, I see the flower, and integrate maybe some of the larger line and design corporeal stuff into just picking a flower, but which they think is, of course, a ton of fun. And I put on French accordion music, and sometimes I even wear a beret and let set the scene a little bit so they have fun. But really what I'm doing is I'm not teaching them how to pick up a flower, or what's another one? I'll do the flower or something very simple and classic on the first day. What I'm teaching them to do is to see the flower and decide to pick it. And then all the other stuff goes back into technique. But that concept of there is no flower, and then I look and then decide, oh, I want to pick that flower, and start them on this.
Which is a foundation of just the acting craft too.
Yeah, it is.
I was going to say, like you used the word stereotype just a moment ago, and that you were saying how they were attracted to feeling and experiencing the stereotype.
Yeah.
So the question is two parts. Like, why do you think that is from them, and what would be that stereotype?
Yeah.
What is that stereotype that can give them a sense of beyond the stereotype? You know what I'm talking about?
For sure.
Yeah. And why are they attracted to that? What is the power of that? Which is very interesting. That's, because mime by the general public is very often thought of as a stereotype, as we all know, right? It's like, if you do this, you're the mime, right? With a white face. But, what do you think about that?
Initially I was always so resistant to it because it was so different from what I did and what I learned mime was. And I was always kind of like, that's not what I do. I'm an artiste. After a while, I just started embracing it because I was like, well, that's my own baggage. Who cares? But I think I used to sort of perceive the stereotype as an interest in a person sort of performing illusions, physical illusions. But now, at least in the culture that I'm in now, I do think, harking back to our conversation about technique, there is a yearning amongst clowns and physical theater artists to have a way to be beautiful and perceive themselves as beautiful. And they really think the stereotype, which I'm actually somewhat flattered by, is of a classically trained French mime who is very graceful and beautiful in their movement. So even though part of it is, oh, it's silly, and as you know, a lot of people, I get approached to be mimes in people's videos probably at least once a month. There's a lot of young filmmakers in there. They contact, oh, I heard you're a mime. Will you be a mime in my piece? And almost always, and you probably can relate, they don't need an actual mime in their piece. They need someone dressed like a mime to get like their head blown off with a shotgun. It's always like, oh, it's two mimes and they get in a fight. Oh, it's this mime and then a dog attacks them. Oh, it's this mime and they get run over by a car. And so there is that kind of mime archetype that people enjoy, the idea of a kind of silent character just getting like smushed and crushed. And I used to be kind of offended by that. I'm like, well, why do you want me to do that? And sometimes I did it early on. I'm like, okay. And then I'd be like, oh, and now I have to, what's going on? But now I just ask them, I'm quite frankly, I'm like, do you need an actual classically trained mime to do this? Or can you just get your friend to do it? Because it would be just as good with someone else. But I think right now, there are a lot of people that dress like mimes. And I think the draw is to have some kind of version of themselves or some kind of medium in which to be perceived as beautiful and graceful and artistic. There's this yearning to be perceived as an artist because although there's this crazy clown scene in LA, there's not a huge sort of underground theater scene. There is theater. It tends to be splotches here and there. It's not like Chicago where there's this massive united theater community. There's a ton of actors and directors and writers, and they're doing things here and there. But the clown scene, to me, it kind of is the theater scene, and we're all in comedy venues or anywhere that'll let us perform. But I think that there is a yearning to pursue their sort of inner artist and their sort of inner kind of, dare I say, like pretentious artist, or some type of way to allow themselves permission to be a fully embodied artist, as opposed to just like a professional goof. Nothing wrong with that.
You think there's a respect for experience in the younger
Um, I
people?
definitely think so. On one hand, in terms of teachers, and definitely, I mean, it's all about, oh, when are you doing Gaulier? When are you doing such and such? It's all like they all know and talk about the sort of older teachers, and they're all looking for workshops and going around and doing stuff. But at the same time, like with, a lot of them spring from the comedy community, which definitely is, the comedy community generally is like a young person's game. I mean, they're like in college. I mean, now you can major in comedy in college. So they also tend to have this relationship with comedy where, you know, they like what they like, and they like a different generation of people that make them laugh. They like Bo Burnham, and even now, to me, Bo Burnham's a kid. Like when he came out and he was like a kid on YouTube, I was, of course, in my like mid 30s, I was like, I'm not watching this. Like, it's not funny. I don't know what's going on. Now he's even considered like an older comedian, and he's like their elder, and they're like, oh, we like that, and it's just a different thing that they weren't, in New York in the 80s, seeing all kinds of cool avant-garde physical theater. They grew up watching these people that they like, and so they are a little more like judgmental about what's funny and what's not funny. Um,
You have a shorter attention span too, probably from.
yeah, I think everybody in general does have that, but at the same time, there is this swing back where they have a shorter attention span. But in LA at the moment, I mean, my shows are filled. If I do, for example, I'm doing a mime show on August 4th. Um, and I very rarely do like a straight, oh, I'm doing mime pieces. But people are so hungry to see that stuff that I guarantee you that show's going to sell out as soon as I put it on sale. It's also in a smaller venue, so it's not hard to sell it out. But I have a pretty good sense of what people will come into and what will not in terms of my demographic here. But they have a short attention span, but it leaves them with this void, I think, for artistic satisfaction, which comes from, really going head in with an artist into something really deep. So there's a lot of people there's a ton of live shows. There's a huge audience for it. That's one of the reasons why I started the ensemble too, is, there is an audience for live theater that presents and perceives itself as highly artistic. And so the ensemble is similar to the neo-futurists in that we are artists, and all our marketing is like, this is art. And all, and when I teach classes, I'm like, this will get you nothing in terms of your showbiz career, which isn't necessarily true. But my whole focus is like, you're not going to get famous by taking this class, but do you want to get better? And there seems to be this really sort of powerful thing there. And like I said, this mime show, it will sell out because people are, there's a puppetry show. I went to a really great puppetry show the other day. It was like kind of artistic puppetry, and there's a desire for that, that I think is related to the TikTok and the short attention span. It's like, it's kind of polarized in that way.
Yeah,
You have your
yeah,
phone to give you endless amounts of content and
right.
ideas, but it tends to be idea, 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 idea. And I think there is a sort of basic human hunger for something that gives them the experience of this deeper artistic experience. And also they want to experience that on stage.
Yeah.
So
I
you
think
know,
with a live performance, you're for me, my attention span is definitely longer. If I try to watch a mime piece or some sort of physical theater piece that's been filmed and put on online, I find myself like I don't have the patience to watch the full thing. Whereas if I'm in a live performance, I'm ready for that. I'm looking for that
yeah, yeah,
longer experience.
yeah.
What it seems you like to teach. We've
Mhm.
talked a lot about teaching and workshops as well as performance. So what's your perception, your feeling on that? Like how should an artist teach, or is that a responsibility, or why do you like to teach or not? Or do you think it's something you have to do to make money? Like, what do you think about that?
Um, Kind of all of those. In general, I do enjoy teaching. I started teaching fairly early on because I was just a class. I signed up for every class I could. Like I mentioned, sorry it's so loud. I think there's a truck out there, but
We
I
can't hear
start
it.
I took every workshop I could get my hands on early on because like I'd said, I didn't have exposure to theater growing up. And when I discovered it, I felt like, I had purpose and more meaning in my life. So I took classes, everything classes, classes, classes. So I absolutely loved the realm of a class. So I did start teaching. I do enjoy it. I do find that if I teach too much, I don't necessarily get sick of teaching, but it does change my relationship with the community. Like I tend to go on a cycle. Like this winter, I taught a lot. Not a lot. I'll teach a clown class. I teach a Buffon, and I'll teach like a round of mime. And sometimes the class will keep going depending on interest. But after a while, um, I will notice that the community will start to treat me a little different in a way that makes me a little uncomfortable, not badly, but almost too good. Like I walk into the room and people are maybe auditioning for me a little, or they're only wanting to talk to me about clown or mime in a way that you talk to a teacher, or they want to show me things, and it changes my relationship with the community away. So I'll stop teaching and just do shows, and then I'll kind of go back to just I like being an artist in the community who teaches. um, um, that's just my preference. And the best marketing for my classes that I can do is to do shows that people are really interested in. Now, I'm on the same footing as everyone else. I bomb just as much as everyone else. I tell all my clown students that I'm like, oh, I'm performing this weekend, but just so you know, just because I teach does not mean that I kill it every time. I am flailing, just like everyone else. Um, but I find that if I'm teaching too much and I feel like I'm out there just trying to like get people to sign up, it's usually a sign that I need to chill and I need to take a real big artistic risk. Because if I really am putting myself out there as an artist and taking a big risk, people will gravitate towards my classes more in a way that doesn't require as much marketing, which I like. Because as you know, being an independent theater artist, your real job is marketing and producing. 90% of what I do is graphic design for posters, marketing, online social media managing, But I have kind of a relationship with teaching where I get ebbs and flows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I tend to like teaching. I have spaces that I like to teach more in, meaning I like to teach like the seekers. I like to kind of have a class and then advertise it once and just let the hungry people seek it out. That's why I think the barn went so well. If you go through the trouble of getting your ass to Maine and staying in a barn for a week with a bunch of other weirdos, you are hungry to learn it. And that's different. Whereas when I taught in a college, um, it was a little different. Sometimes I would have amazing classes, but like a third of the class wants to be there, is interested, a third is indifferent, and then a third does not want to be there. And the way that I learned how to teach was teaching something I'm passionate about to people that are also passionate about it. So I kind of had to figure that out. How do I engage people that wouldn't be taking the class if they didn't have to complete their major? So, I was kind of up and down with that. Although certainly didn't hate it. And I got a lot of mimes out of and clowns out of my college students. I taught for 5 years at Columbia, and a lot of those students that I collaborate with now. Some of them hire me for gigs now. It was an important thing to do, but I did struggle energetically a little more with how to sustain that in terms of teaching. I've struggled to engage them, but now I'm kind of back to just the seekers, the people that are really hungry to figure it out and learn it. They have to find me, they have to find the class, and that seems to work better for me. But I do love teaching, and I love traveling to other places and teaching, because then I get the best of both worlds. I get to teach, but then also I don't get to have that relationship with the community where I'm like the teacher in the scene. Not to diss that person. That's who I am, and I don't have any issues with. I take classes as well. I'm a huge, especially if it's a mime class. If there's a mime class happening, then I'm going to be in there.
Yeah, I hear you with that one. I find that whenever I sort of creatively have a slump, I that's what I do is I take a class. I'm gonna go
Yeah.
take a class with James this summer. So
Oh, cool.
that's my fun thing to fly out to Ashland, Oregon and take James is along with Carlos Martinez, who's from Spain.
Oh, yeah.
So
Oh, yeah. I'm
it's quite a
familiar.
treat. I'm really looking forward to it. So, Dean, what kind of advice would you give to young people who want to pursue the arts, particularly the arts of mime?
Get involved, seek it out, find other people that are interested. And I'm the same as you, find a class somehow, whether it's an online class, if that has to be your introduction, that's a totally viable on ramp. Find an in-person class and travel. See, that's the way, I came up in the generation. There weren't any full-time mime schools. When I was young, it was all about immersions. And that also happens to suit my learning style. So for me, it was about saving up for sometimes years. Sometimes I'd have to save up for 4 years, and then I would have go and study somewhere for 2 weeks. So get into a summer class, whether it's the barn or with James or Del Arte, or if you can swing it, go to Europe. Somehow, some way, beg, borrow, and steal to get into an immersion. And although, especially with mime, it can seem like there's a lot of artistic isolation because it is a kind of a more esoteric art form. It does exist, similar to with clown, although in clown right now, there's a lot of different classes you can take, at least where I am. It's still, you know, clowns and mimes they're clowns. Their websites aren't the best. Their online the online presence make it seem like they do not exist, but they do, and there's lots of them, and they're out there and they're doing amazing work. And I always think, oh, there's no mimes, and then every time I travel, I'll come across a mime troupe or a mime or someone and I'm like, I just didn't know. They're out there. There's just different ecosystems, and it is a live art. So my advice is to get involved, and then don't be afraid to make the leap from class to stage. The class to stage leap feels like it's a mile long, but it's the same thing. If you can take a mime class, then you can do a mime show, and just start doing it. Be the first to be bad at something, so that also you're the first to not be bad at it as well.
Hey, Dean, if you were 120 years old and you were looking back at your life as a mime slash clown, what would you want people to remember about you? Or how would you describe that journey, and how would you like to be thought of?
Um, like I'd mentioned, I'm a real kind of trickster, prankster. I like to be playfully adversarial. I would like to be remembered as a person who like kind of played a trick on us. I like to play tricks on my students. I like to be irreverent. I like to make fun of the things that I'm doing, including myself. So I would like to be remembered. I get a big kick out of people, especially like former students or people that saw me perform a while back, going, "Remember that? time you made us go outside and act like we were squirrels, and you said it was like an ancient mime thing that's been around for that wasn't you made that up right then, didn't you? And I just will snicker for a week straight based on that stuff. So I would like to be remembered as someone who was like a little bit who was a little shisty. I think that makes me laugh. I get a kick out of that.
So, one last question. Dean, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Um, Good question. You know, I would love to be like I would love to make a feature film. I'd like to be a director, but also I think about like Richmond Shepard, like when he was in it, even when I was in New York not that long ago, and he was still teaching the Saturday morning drop-in class, like when he was like 90 or something. That's fine with me. I would love to do that. Like I would love to just be like 90 years old doing a drop-in class in some cool place and just seeing who comes through. That would be fun for me. Like that's totally fine for me when I see even like Marcel Marceau obviously was as famous as a person can get, but when I studied with him, he's like 80 years old, but one of the funniest people I've ever been in a room with. And they did this whole thing of here, there's an etiquette or when you're around the master and you have to behave like this and you never know. And the one time he went off on something, it was like very intimidating. But the second he walked in the room, and I'm a comedian, I like funny people. It's how I relate to people. One of the funniest guys I've ever met, funny stories the whole time, goofing, riffing. I was like, well, this guy, I was like, I love that. I want to be a funny old man. I want to be like a funny old man who like wears leather pants and a weird beret and says things and flirts with people, and that's totally okay with me. I'd be completely satisfied if I could just be like a flirty, funny old man. So that's
Sounds
what I want to
good.
be when I grow
Well,
up.
I think you're on your way.
Yeah, I think so.
Marceau said to me, or he said that an art dies for the lack of teachers in schools. So you're doing that, but also he said once I was at a dinner with him, and somebody asked him, what's your philosophy of life, Marceau? And he held up a glass, and he said everything in temperance, and he put his finger there right at the very top of the glass. So that said a lot about him right there. So
Gotcha.
I think you're on your way to being that kind of person. So
Cool.
Thank you so much for being a part of the Mime Radio Show podcast, Dean. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, anytime. I'm honored. I'm honored to be with to be even in the same podcast with you and all your previous guests. I'm honored.
yeah, well, I think your presence as Stephen Evans is very important. So we're
Cool.
really happy to have had you, Dean, and we hope that we'll be seeing you again.
For sure.
Yeah. Thank you
Thank
very much.